Welcome back. The European Union has announced a 168 million rand donation towards the eradication of child labor in the agriculture sector. Delegates at the 5th Global Conference on the Elimination of Child Labor says ending child labor will require increased social protection and monitoring of supply chains through a multi-stakeholder approach. Research by the International Labour Organization indicates that child labor increased by 16.6 million in sub-Saharan Africa in the last 4 years. Now let's discuss this further. We're joined via Zoom by Insaf Nizam, is the specialist on fundamental principles and rights at work at the International Labour Organization's South Asia Sub-Regional Office in New Delhi. Sir, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Now, I know you are at the conference in KwaZulu-Natal, during the course of this week. Now, a lot has been said in as far as global priorities, around the elimination of child labor. Talk to us about some of the key priorities that you think, need to be stepped up in as far as eradicating and, eliminating child labor.
Yeah, thank you very much for linking me. And in fact, we originally came to this conference with a heavy heart because of the increase in child labor numbers. But once we are here, we see the commitment, we see the engagement, not only from governments, but also from all stakeholders, including the community. And this conference has created a lot of optimism in that sense. So in terms of the priorities that we need to get right, I think number one comes as commitment. Without commitment, we are not going to get anywhere. That commitment has to go throughout. It has to penetrate not just within the governments, but also within workers' organizations, employees' organizations. And what we heard from yesterday was that a proper understanding has to go into the community. Then we also discussed the issue of education, the ever important subject of education, not only just to make it accessible to children, but also make sure that they meaningfully participate in education, and education always remains a better option rather than child labor. Because even if there are schools, if schools are not child friendly, if they don't provide quality education, if the children are punished, if the children are handled in an inappropriate way, they are going to sort of skip school and remain in child labor. Some of the sectors that were on focus, definitely agriculture has to be in focus, because 70% of the children of the world who are in child labor are in the agricultural sector. Social protection, you just mentioned that, that's being discussed in a big way here. A number of panel discussions as well as the main plenary discussions also highlight the importance of social protection for every child and for every vulnerable individual. So it's a very interesting and important conference that highlights these priorities. Of course, when we talk about education, when you talk about social protection, also comes the question of how these are implemented and who foots the bill, who pays for it. So is it only the governments of the countries where child labor is prevalent, or is it an international responsibility? And we are looking at the broader picture where everyone has to get together, right? So that's the message that is coming out from here.
I would imagine
a message of partnership in action.
I would imagine that European Union donation of 168 million rands towards, the eradication of child labor, specifically in the agricultural sector, will come in handy, especially if you look at the African continent. Of the 165 million child laborers, the African continent has 92 million, and 80% of those 92 million, we are told, come from the agricultural sector. But just looking at your role and your responsibility from where you're operating from in New Delhi, how significant and how How deep-rooted is the problem there? At the conference, we were speaking to some, survivors of child labor who are now professionals in their field, but they talk about being rescued at the age of 6, some at the age of 10 years old.
It is a big problem all over the world, and I would say that despite the fact that Asia has made some progress in terms of reducing child labor numbers. There were 113 million in 2008, and now they've brought it down to 48 million, which is significant, but still it remains a very big issue in Asia as well. Because there are a number of factors, and it's not only the labor market, it's not only about education, it's also about the community's understanding of what child labor is and how much harm it can cause to the children, and also looking at the longer term benefit of a child properly being educated, skilled, and then going to the labor market as an adult or as a child who is grown up and who is able to work legally as well as physically and psychologically, as opposed to a child going at a very young age who is unable to work, who is very vulnerable to injuries, to workplace hazards, etc., and causing a bigger damage to the child, to the family, and to the community. So, it's also about changing community practices, how communities understand child labor. It is also about the government's taking initiative to bring stronger laws with teeth, as a panelist actually put yesterday. Policies with teeth, so that proper action can be taken to eradicate child labor. It's not about jailing every parent whose child is going to going to work. That's not the case. That's not how you should approach child labor. It's looking at the big picture, why families have to send their children, what alternatives can be created, how decent work, decent wages can be provided to those families who are working, their parents, the adult siblings who can bring proper income, and they are protected when they cannot work, like when they're injured, when they're sick. There is some sort of social protection that provides them support so that children don't have to drop out of education and go to child labor. So that holistic picture is very important, and this is where Asia is also working on. You might have noticed my long title, Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, which looks at child labor in the context of other evils like forced labor, like discrimination at work, like human trafficking, for instance, and then the ability for workers to form trade unions and bargain for their rights and their working conditions, etc. So it's also important to get the environment right, so that families can earn good incomes and then send their children to school and to education rather than to work.
Mr. Nizam, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. You've got a long week ahead of you to discuss all of those crucial tasks. Thank you so much. All right, that was Insaf Nizam. He's from the International Labour Organization.